I'm Anthony DiLorenzo outside the federal courthouse for now the third week in the Diddy trial alongside trial attorney Misty Maris. So we had a big witness testify today. We don't know her true identity. She went by the pseudonym of Mia because of the nature of her testimony, talking about sex assault. And she's talking about she was raped by Diddy, sexually assaulted, and multiple occasions, never reported. How do you think all of this landed with the jury?
I actually think her testimony was very, very credible. Keep in mind, she's an employee of Combs. She testified about her work environment, that basically she was living at his home, that there were elements of control. When he wasn't happy, he would take her phone away. And this is all speaking to very specific issues in the charges. And we're getting to this aspect of what's the racketeering activity to establish RICO. They have to establish predicate crimes. Her testimony is furthering that narrative with respect to what's in the indictment, which is forced labor. So we're hearing about her work environment and those elements of control. It also corroborates Cassie Ventura's testimony. We've heard from several witnesses now that they've personally seen that Combs abused Cassie. So that also speaks to the elements of force, fraud, and coercion in sex trafficking. And lastly, she's a witness about what's called prior bad acts, meaning that she's testifying about conduct that shows a pattern by the defendant. That specifically relates to her allegations of sexual assault, that Combs uses his power and influence to coerce women and to abuse women who are in his sphere.
So these women, these employees are under his thumb, they are under his rule, and that speaks to the enterprise?
It speaks to both the enterprise and sex trafficking. Both aspects include this idea that he's this all-powerful being in both the industry, within his organizations. Remember, the indictment says that his organizations, his businesses, are really just fronts for him to conduct criminal activity for his own desires. So that's why her testimony actually speaks to both charges. And it also tends to corroborate Cassie Ventura, where the prosecution's hurdle is to show that she engaged in what's called commercial sex acts, the freak-offs, through force, fraud, or coercion. So that element of control and that pattern exuded over both his employees and his romantic partners is something the prosecution is focused on, and it's relevant to all of the charges at play.
So let's talk about Mia as an employee. She worked for him for 8 years. She never came forward with any of this because she says that he was just too scary of a guy, essentially, and that who would believe her? How could she go up against Sean Combs? She talked about how she was physically abused as well on multiple occasions, how she was forced to work long hours under tough circumstances. She would set up the hotel rooms for these freak-offs. She would clean up afterwards. So where do you think Mia stacks up when it's the hierarchy of the witnesses for the government at this point?
So one of the reasons that I found her to be very credible is that she said, I wanted to take this to my grave. I was not planning on coming forward. I ultimately was subpoenaed by the government to speak about my experience with Combs and told my story because I was told to tell the truth, right? So that's where her testimony comes from, and that gives it an air of credibility. She also did not have a romantic relationship with him, so there's going to be a bit less for the defense to attack on cross-examination. That being said, her testimony is relevant for the reasons that we spoke about, this aspect of patterns of control, but we're really not getting into the mechanics and the mechanisms of the criminal enterprise. What is it? So witnesses are supposed to testify about the means and methods, which in essence, in layman's terms, is how it works. What's its goal? What's its function? And she was a witness that I personally, from pre-trial arguments, expected to get into that and to really help the jury formulate what the criminal enterprise actually is, which we have not really heard about so far.
So what is the goal? How is he making money off of any of this?
So it doesn't necessarily have to be financial. Of course, we know that there's other elements of not only the forced labor, which would be monetary, also drugs and distribution of drugs that could be monetary as well. But when a RICO conspiracy charge means that two or more people agree, and Combs has to be one of them, to commit a pattern of racketeering activity, which means crimes, in furtherance of the criminal enterprise. So that's the legal standard.
Who's the agreement with?
And that's what we don't know yet. So to me, the one witness who really spoke with the most evidence that would lean towards the RICO charges is Capricorn Clark, because she talked about Uncle Paulie taking her from, taking her and bringing her to a room to conduct a 5-day lie detector test and said, if you don't pass, I'm going to throw you into the East River. So there's another person who might be complicit with Combs. Will we hear from him? Will we hear from D-Rock? We keep hearing about a security guard named D-Rock.
He seems like someone everyone loves, though.
Yes, but he's also a security guard who's here for a lot of the nefarious conduct. So will we hear from those witnesses? Will they testify for the prosecution? We don't know, because the witness lists are being released really at the end of the week or just right before witnesses take the stand.
So when we have cross-examination of Mia tomorrow, how do you expect this to go with Brian Steele?
So Brian Steele, it's going to be a fine line to toe. And I say that because you have a victim of sexual assault who really testified explicitly and in graphic, disturbing detail about her experiences with Combs and the sexual abuse that she endured. So it's got to toe that line between getting what you need on the record and undercutting credibility, which is usually done by saying, well, this was a long time ago. Do you remember the details? Are there inconsistent statements? But not shaming that individual. And also there's rules in court about what types of things can come in on cross. For instance, you can't talk about a victim's sexual history. So there's going to be limitations. Now, what I think you're going to see, and I say this because the defense has said it's going to be a full day tomorrow of cross-examination. That's a lot of time. Perhaps we'll see more written communications.
We've seen a lot of that from the defense, essentially.
Exactly, and we know that she's, works for him for 8 years. During that time period, everybody's communicating emails, texts. So will there be something in those communications that the defense will use in the same type of way that they use with Cassie Ventura?
And looking forward, how many more victims do you expect us to hear from?
So as of now, we know that the prosecution intends to call. Cassie Ventura was victim 1. Victim 2 has not been called yet. That's apparently another romantic partner of Combs. Mia was victim 4. So we've heard
number 3.
Number 3 is not coming. No, number 3 is not going to testify. So that is probably a real issue for the prosecution, because the jury will hear less, right? You'll hear from less alleged victims in this case. But we will still hear from victim 2. And from what we know, victim 2 also, under a pseudonym, proceeding anonymously, was a romantic relationship with Combs, and I think we're likely to hear the same types of patterns that we did with Cassie Ventura, although the relationship was much shorter. Keep in mind, we always have to go back to the criminal indictment. It's really important to remember what the charges are. One, in the indictment, prosecutors say that Combs lures women into romantic relationships for the purpose of trafficking them, to engage in the commercial sex act. So keep in mind prosecutors' questions about the romantic relationships, how they began, those elements of control, probably a common pattern that we'll hear again with victim 2.
So was today a win or a loss for the prosecution?
So far, a win for the prosecution. I say that because the defense hasn't gone yet, so we don't know what's to come on cross-examination, but Mia's testimony had a lot of benefits for prosecutors, and she was very, very credible on the stand, emotional, but also very direct in answering the questions. So I think the prosecution had a win today.
All right, Ms. DeMaris, thank you for your insight. We will see you outside of court on Friday for more bombshell testimony in the Diddy trial.